thank you so much for coming to this presentation. It really means a lot to see so many people here that are interested in improving their communication skills, especially in our industry. I think people assume that it's a lot less collaborative than it really is. And so communication, especially in the tech industry, is something really important. My name is Casie Siekman. I am a native English speaker, so if anybody here doesn't understand any of the analogies I use, or if I speak too fast, please raise your hand and let me know, because everything's going to work out much better if we're all on the same page. So please feel free to interject anytime you have any questions. You can find me on Twitter. I joined Twitter just as soon as I started doing presentations, only for that. So I'm at Cassandra Danger. I used to be a front-end consultant in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in the US, for a company called Solution Design Group, and I think that's how I'm listed on the program right now. But about a month ago, I accepted a position at Prime Academy in Minneapolis and became an instructor teaching other people how to become full-stack developers. So JavaScript is my jam. So I don't know much about DevOps except for the fact that I very much appreciate what you do. Make my stuff work. All right, so we're just going to jump right into this. So lack of accountability. When this happens in a workplace, the workplace can start to look like a dog park. So you have employees just running around with no direction, chasing that ball, getting distracted, chasing that ball. If they have no clear requests to follow, nothing is going to get done, and they're not accountable for anything. In acting out, anyone who has emotions or an ego is susceptible to feeling like they've been wronged, and those defense mechanisms will go up. And once those defense mechanisms go up, they can either act out with silence and totally shut down and decide not to contribute anything to the conversation, which is too bad, because especially if they're a great employee, why wouldn't you want to hear what they have to say? Or they could act out with violence, which is also a pretty negative thing, because they will always let you know how unhappy they are or how much they don't like this idea. The inability to agree. How many people here have had a meeting just to decide one thing? Like, you just need to come out of this meeting deciding one thing. Could be even as easy as, like, what is our color? And then what happened if did you come to a decision in that meeting, or did you have to book another meeting, and then another meeting, and then another meeting? What I've noticed in the technology industry is everybody is very opinionated and holds those opinions very strongly. And so there can be an inability to agree, and then you start to have meetings upon meetings upon meetings to decide one thing. And missed deadlines. And I think this one is pretty obvious. I don't really have any examples for this because it's pretty much spelled out right there. For the last 20 years, I have worked in retail shops, hotels, restaurants. I've worked in the music industry, the advertising industry, and now the tech industry. And I was seeing these issues across all of those industries. I would see them pop up in numerous ways, but it was usually all the same thing. And a few years ago, I really got interested in trying to figure this out, because across all these industries and all these issues, everybody was super smart, really passionate, but there were these issues that were really standing in their way from achieving their goals and becoming as efficient as possible. And I started digging down and wondering why this was happening. And I think I finally figured it out. It was communication. Communication was blocking them from meeting their goals and helping others and just being as happy as they can at work and in their family and with their friends. And more importantly, it was the inefficiency to effectively communicate. They were severely lacking just those basic communication skills that were really going to bring them all together. But then I wondered, could that seriously be it? Communication is not that hard. We communicate every single day. It's like second nature. We don't even have to think about it. But that right there is the problem. We don't think about it. And we need to start paying attention to our communication. Now, I like to think I'm a pretty smart person, but I couldn't have been the first person to come up with this. Other people had to have come to the same conclusion, and they had. Many, 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 many Many, many, many times. There is a copious amount of resources out there just to help you out with your communication skills, and it can be so overwhelming. By the time you have researched which expert, which path, which book, which idea is best for you, you could have read about 30 books. What a waste of time. But luckily for you, you got me. A little bit about me. Like I said earlier, I am a front-end developer. JavaScript is my favorite. I like playing music, cooking, drinking wine in the house I just bought in St. Paul, Minnesota. And so Minnesota's in the US. How many people here have heard of Minnesota? Oh, awesome. All right. What are some of your impressions of Minnesota? What's Fargo? Yep, the accent, you betcha. Yeah, sure, you betcha. We don't sound like that. Anything else? It could be even just stereotypes. Anything you've heard, anything you've seen in media. I can't hear back there.
You have highway infrastructure problems.
Highway infrastructure problems, yes. There's a saying in Minnesota that we have 2 seasons, winter and road construction season. So we're in we're in road construction season right now. So we're fixing all the potholes from the winter and trying to fix all of our infrastructure problems, which means every highway is totally torn up. Has anybody here ever heard of the saying, Minnesota nice? We have this thing in Minnesota where apparently we're very nice people. We always we just put that off. We have smiles and we're nice. But it's not actually Minnesota nice, it's like Minnesota passive aggressive. We do not like to stir the pot. We don't want to ruffle any feathers or push anybody or make anybody not like us. And because of that, we start to slowly resent people because we can't tell them how we feel and what we want and how we really think an idea is going to play out. And because of that, I really got interested in communication because, especially in Minnesota, I needed to learn that delicate art of communication and how to navigate the path of the passive aggressiveness that is Minnesota. So nothing I'm telling you here today is new. I have definitely had help from a lot of resources. I am the product of everything I have learned, read, consumed. These are 3 books that have really stood out to me and made a big impression on my life, on my experiences, and on this presentation. But what I am here to do today is basically boil all that down for you into 4 main items. I've taken all of my learnings, watchings, readings, conversations, and experiences, all my trials and errors, and I have boiled it down to 4 items that I think can really help you become a better communicator. That is understanding our feelings, trust, critical conversations, and making requests. And this might seem like a lot right now, might seem really overwhelming, but if any one of these is able to resonate with you and you can take it back and practice it, you will definitely be well on your way to becoming more efficient at work, a better partner at home, and that friend everyone's gonna wanna hang out with. All right, so we're just gonna jump right in. I want you to close your eyes. We're going to do a little visualization activity. So imagine you're in a conference room. You're doing a practice presentation to your boss with your partner on the idea you've been working on for a couple of months. And you're really excited to be able to start the process of practicing it, presenting it to your boss, and getting ready to present it to the C-level executives next week, and they are the decision makers. So you are really excited about this. You are in the middle of your presentation, you're speaking, and you come to a spot where you pause to let some information sink in. But before you're able to start up again, your partner jumps in and takes over the rest of the presentation. She doesn't let you get a word in edgewise. She continues to talk the whole time, and you're left there just standing there, watching, helpless, wondering when you can jump back in, just kind of feeling like you're just window dressing. So I want you to open your eyes up. And how do you feel? How did that make you feel when your co-presenter just swooped in and took over? How does anybody feel about that? Angry, yeah. Anybody feel just upset, bummed out, embarrassed? So that's something we need to work on, is really understanding those feelings and digging down to what those feelings are and what is stimulating those feelings. It's a lot harder than it sounds, because we have definitely been trained as humans to hide our emotions from our consciousness, because emotions are messy and confusing, and emotions get in the way. And they kind of they are meant to confuse our kind of logical mind, take those emotions out. But it can be really hard to effectively communicate with others if you can't effectively understand yourself. You need to understand your feelings before being able to expect others help you reach your goal or find common goals with others. So go back to those feelings of being mad, angry, bummed out, and we have to really dig down and understand what those mean. Because if I tell somebody I'm mad about something, that doesn't give them a lot of actionable items. They can't really do anything to make me feel less mad. Being mad doesn't give them enough information. And at least in the English vocabulary, there are so many words that people can use to describe how they're feeling, but we tend to fall back on the really generic ones of being mad, sad, happy, but that isn't descriptive enough. So in my 20s, I lived with a roommate, and we got along really well, actually. She didn't eat my food in the fridge, and I didn't record over her shows. We were actually pretty good. It was a pretty good situation, except for one thing. She would always leave her dirty dishes in the sink, and it drove me crazy. And every week I would say, Carrie, you have to get rid of these dirty dishes. They're bumming me out. Like, I can't look at them. Please clean your dirty dishes. She would say, sure. And I thought we had just perfected communication, avoided a big issue, and we were smarter than everyone else. But then a week later, those dirty dishes would be back in the sink. And the conversation would start all over again. And finally, I blew up a little bit. I was like, Carrie, those dirty dishes are back in the sink, and it is driving me crazy. You cannot do even one thing for me. You're being super selfish. And that seems like an overreaction to dirty dishes. But little did Carrie know, it wasn't the dirty dishes that were bumming me out. It was what they represented. And I didn't really help her out by just saying that they bummed me out. The dirty dishes to me represented chores piling up, me falling behind, just in life in general. And they started to cause me just like stress and anxiety because of what they represented to me. And I'm sure if I would have told Carrie that those dishes being in the sink made me feel like I was falling behind on my chores, made me feel like I was falling behind in life, and that it just stresses me out, and gave her that kind of path to take, she would have been a lot more open to communication and action. And I think understanding how overwhelmed I would get when I'd see those dirty dishes, she would understand and be more willing to take action. And also allow yourself to feel those feelings. Don't feel mad about being depressed. Don't feel embarrassed about feeling anxious. Don't make excuses for feeling proud. We need to be able to feel those feelings so we can dig down and understand them and understand what's causing them, because that cause is what we need to figure out to take action on. Once we understand our feelings, we're able to assess the situation that we're in. And to have an open and honest conversation with others, we need to be open and honest with ourselves. We need to feel safe enough to feel those feelings, safe enough to express those feelings and ideas, and safe to give and receive honest feedback, and safe to fully participate. And the way that we build those safe spaces is with trust. So trust is pertinent to creating those safe spaces. So I'm going to tell you a quick story of Daniel and Katie, and I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget anything. So Katie's been with the company since high school, and she has worked her way up through the whole company in numerous different positions, and she's currently a project manager. Daniel just got hired from the outside. He has been there for about 3 weeks, and he was hired as the project manager supervisor, so he's now Katie's boss. After a few weeks of settling in, Katie noticed that Daniel would start all of their meetings by saying, hi guys. And it's not that big of a deal, but Katie feels like saying guys is exclusionary because the group is comprised of men and women. And this makes her feel like she's not part of the group. Other women have expressed similar concerns with her in just casual conversation. So Katie decides that she should share this information with Daniel. He might not even realize that he's doing it. So she swings by his office, asks if he's free to chat, and she sits down. Daniel, I've been noticing that you start all of our meetings by saying, hi guys, and it makes me feel a little excluded because I'm not a guy, I'm a woman. Seriously? I thought you had a serious item you wanted to discuss. Everyone says guys as a gender-neutral term for a group. I didn't mean anything by it. I think you're being way too sensitive. Now, I have to go get ready for a real meeting. I'll see you at our stand-up at 11. Whoa. What happened there? I think Katie's message didn't really warrant that harsh response from Daniel. It kind of blew up there. And now if I was Katie, I would never want to talk to Daniel about anything ever again. I do have a feeling that Daniel didn't trust Katie. He didn't trust her motivation for bringing this to his attention. And he didn't trust that she had his best interest in mind. And because of that, he responded with silence and violence. And he responded with silence by cutting off that communication, not even opening up for debate. And then he responded with violence by asking her if she was serious, and then that snarky remark about leaving for a real meeting. So that really shuts the conversation down. He did not open up that conversation for debate. He did not even ask Katie how she felt. So to be able to receive a sensitive message like that, we must trust the deliverer and trust that their feedback, their message, is in our best interest, and they have our best interests at heart. If you do not trust them, you can start to feel attacked by a sensitive message like that, and then your defense mechanisms kick in, and you kind of shut down. And then we close ourselves off from any opportunity to grow. One thing we do in a situation like that, when we start to shut down and our defense mechanisms kick in, is that we tell ourselves a story. And storytelling is one of those defense walls. It happens between a stimulus and you forming your response to that, and it can happen so quickly you don't even realize it. It's a way of attaching some outside judgment onto what should just be an evaluation, an observation of the facts. And in a situation where you're starting to feel attacked, this story is usually a negative story. If you don't feel safe, you're not going to be open to hear a positive message. And this is good to know for others as well. Knowing that they're going to have some sort of emotional response, they're probably going to tell themselves a story. It's good to just be aware of that, that if they overreact like Daniel did, you might be able to be aware of the fact that they might have just told themselves a story and be able to take that into consideration when you respond to them. So back to our Katie and Daniel story. I am going to redo it and, not redo it yet, but I think Daniel might have told himself a negative story in between hearing what Katie said and forming his response. And I'm guessing it sounded a little something like, I just started working here, and Katie is already nitpicking. This doesn't even relate to my job performance. She's just trying to find something wrong with me. If she doesn't want me as her boss, she should just step up and say it. If I heard that story, I would be super defensive as well. If I was telling myself that story, I would definitely shut down. But nothing in that story actually happened. Daniel's attaching his own judgment on the story and not just observing what the pure facts were. So we're going to redo that conversation, assuming that Daniel trusts Katie a little bit more. Daniel, I've been noticing that you start all of our PM meetings by saying, "Hi, guys," and it makes me feel a little excluded because I'm a woman, not a guy. So instead of responding with an immediate emotional response, Daniel pauses, takes the feedback at face value, and thinks about how much it must mean to Katie to bring this up. He responds to the feedback and not to the emotional story he might have just told himself. "Oh, wow, I'm so sorry. I never realized that. I appreciate your feedback, and I'll try to work on it." Did you hear the difference? Daniel felt safer in this space. He trusted Katie, and because he wasn't feeling attacked, he was able to open himself up to the actual conversation at hand and actually listen to what Katie was saying. And that's why it's so important to build trust. But all I've talked about so far is how important trust is, but I haven't actually talked about how to build trust. How did Katie build that trust up with Daniel to make him feel safe in the space and trust that she had his best interests at heart? An easy way we can start to build trust right now is to think of trust like money, and we want to build up our trust account. Totally different than a trust fund. The trust account, you want to build that up so maybe later you can make a withdrawal. So it's something you want to do preemptively. You want to prep for a future tough conversation by building up trust with that person. And that's something you can do with every interaction with your coworkers, your family, your friends. Every interaction with them is a moment to build up that trust account. Show them that you have their best interests at heart. And the first thing you have to do with this is start with heart. You have to sincerely feel in your heart that building up trust with this person is going to be good for them and good for you. And if you don't have their best interests in your heart, if you don't honestly care about them, this is not something you can do. You can't build trust without a sincere appreciation for that person. You can't build trust based on a lie. And this should be pretty easy with family and friends because you get to choose them. Well, your friends, I guess, maybe not family. But you probably do have their sincere best interests in your heart. You want them to succeed. You want them to be happy. It makes you happy to see them happy. But what about that person at work that is super annoying, that you can't even stand to see at the coffee maker for 5 minutes? How in the world are you ever going to have a meaningful conversation, a meaningful connection with them? So what I encourage is to get to know them as a whole person. You might not like the work version of them, but if you dig down a little bit and get to know them as a whole person, as a fellow human, there might be something there that you find that you can appreciate about them. It might be their dedication, their passion for progress, their family, their taste in music, their volunteer efforts, or maybe you just like the same restaurant for lunch. There could be something there that you can really hold on to and really appreciate and use that as the building block for your sincere connection. So you can start building up trust with that person. One day you're going to have to draw on that trust account to have a sensitive conversation, and they'll be much more open to receiving your feedback if they already feel like there's been trust built between you two, and that they trust that you're coming from a good spot and that you are sharing this information with them because you think that it could help them succeed. So another thing we can do is we can inoculate our message. And this is really good to do, especially if you haven't been able to build up that trust account, but you can definitely do it in pair with that. So emotional responses are inevitable. It's the way that we're wired. It's the way our brains are set up. It's why we have been able to survive for so long. It's evolutionary. It is what causes fight or flight. So when you receive any information, it goes through the emotional part of your brain first before hitting the logical part of your brain. So no matter what, there is an emotional response to everything. And knowing that the person you're talking to is going to have an emotional response no matter what, you can kind of do a little bit of extra work to prep that receiver to receive your message. And so we can do this by inoculating our conversation, by letting that person know explicitly that we really appreciate them and we have noticed the work that they're doing in some specific area, and we think that this information is going to be something that is beneficial for them to hear. Even though it might be hard, you want to share that message with them because you think it's going to help them. So going back to Katie and Daniel again, I honestly think that Katie could have done a better job inoculating her message. She just went in there and let it all hang out. And she really told Daniel exactly how she felt right away. And I think her message could have been received differently if she would have inoculated it. So her original statement was that Daniel started all the meetings by saying, "Hi, guys," and it made her feel excluded because she's not a guy, she's a woman. And so her inoculated statement might have sounded like this. "Hey, Daniel, I just want to start off by saying I think you've been a great addition to the company, and I'm really glad you're here. I can see how hard you've been working to become a trusted member of our team, and because of that, I wanted to make sure I shared something with you that's been causing me a little discomfort. When you start our meetings off by saying, 'Hi, guys,' it makes me feel excluded because I'm not a guy, I'm a woman." So you hear the difference in that, where at first she just laid that message out there and just expected him to accept that feedback. In that inoculated message, she made sure that Daniel was prepped and he understood where she was coming from, and that the message she was sharing was not because she was unhappy with him. It was because it meant something to her, and she thought that it might be beneficial for him to have that information, that he could become more successful as that project manager supervisor, knowing how some of his employees felt. So once we have established a trusting space where people feel safe to express themselves and receive that feedback, we can really get to the meat of things. Being in a safe space can open us up to having a really productive conversation, a critical conversation. So remember in the beginning I had you visualize that story of you in the presentation room giving that practice presentation to your boss, and then your partner kind of swooped in and took over the rest of the presentation? Well, that happened to me. And I thought that afterwards I started thinking about it and thought this might be a perfect time for me to practice those communication skills. Is that me? Nice. I think maybe you just need to stand right there. All right. So that practice presentation where Sarah took over, that happened to me. And afterwards, it left me feeling pretty down, and I couldn't really figure out what to do about it. And I figured this would be a perfect time to practice some of my new communication skills, because not only did I feel a little bit wronged, but I also felt like the presentation could be a lot better. But when we presented to the C-level executives the next week, and I really wanted to make sure Sarah and I were on the same page about that. So I'm using my new skills to understand my feelings. I'm feeling upset, angry, embarrassed, and honestly a little stupid, because it made me feel like Sarah felt like I couldn't handle the presentation. So she just decided to swoop in and take over. And so now that I understand how I feel, I'm ready to go talk to Sarah about this and have a conversation with her. Sarah, thank you so much for meeting with me. I really appreciate the time we've been able to spend together working on this initiative, and I feel like we've got something really special on our hands. Thanks. I think so too. And so now I'm going to inoculate the conversation. I've already built up some trust with Sarah over the past few months working on our presentation together, but I'm also going to make sure that she understands where I'm coming from and that I've noticed she's been working on her presentation skills or her public speaking skills. We both put a lot of work into this, and I think you're really great at what you do, and I know you've been working on your public speaking skills, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. During our presentation, you took over after I paused and I didn't get to present again. I felt like it made me look like you had done more work and were trying to take over the presentation, and it made us look like we hadn't practiced much. Really? I thought it went really well. Gary was engaged and we got some great questions at the end. Are you serious? Once he started talking, I couldn't get a word in edgewise. Who cares? Gary enjoyed it and said it was a great idea. Yes, a great idea, but not a great presentation. You are just trying to take credit for all of the work that we both did. Oh, please, you're being so dramatic. Stop thinking of only yourself and start thinking of how well our idea was received. That's what really matters. So let's pause here. Things are getting a little bit heated. I don't understand why, though. I understood my feelings. I inoculated my message. I had built up that trust with Sarah, and still we are having a horrible conversation. We are cross-talking. We are not listening to each other. We are not being very effective communicators. If at this rate, nothing is going to get accomplished. So we're about to enter a critical conversation, and it's not going very well. So critical conversation happens when there's three things present. Opposing opinions. Sarah and I differ very much on how we feel about the presentation. I thought it could use some room for improvement, and she thought it went really well. Strong emotions. We are both feeling very strongly about how we feel about the presentation. And high stakes. If this presentation goes well, it could open a lot of doors for us. And if it goes poorly, we could be sent back to the mailroom. So there are definitely some high stakes here. But I still have one other option. I could just leave. I don't want to upset Sarah any further. And if I keep telling her how I feel, she's going to be upset. And I kind of just don't want to have that conversation. The Minnesota passive aggressiveness is coming out in me. I could just back away and silently resent Sarah for the rest of our time together. But that's not the best thing to do. Doing that would be setting myself up for the fool's choice. And what the fool's choice is the belief that you have to choose between two bad alternatives. One being that you turn the opposer into your enemy by telling them the information that you have. Or the second is by just being quiet, suffering in silence, and going along with something you might not agree with. But that doesn't have to be my only two options. I can use all of these newly acquired skills to approach the conversation correctly, and hopefully have a productive conversation with Sarah. I can tell her how I feel and maintain our positive relationship. I can have it all. Before I jump back into the conversation with Sarah, I do still have a few more skills I need to acquire. And the first of those being mastering your own story. So I mentioned earlier that storytelling is something that happens so quickly within the blink of an eye between the stimulus and forming your response. And we need to learn how to become aware of the story that we tell ourselves, own it, and be able to move past it. Did anybody notice that when I was talking about how that presentation made me feel, I had already told myself a story? I said I was embarrassed and upset and angry, but I also said that I felt stupid. Like the way that Sarah swooped in and took over the presentation made me feel like she didn't think I could handle it. So I'd already told myself a story that Sarah didn't think that I could handle the presentation. So what I need to do now is master that story. I can't help the fact that I've told myself that story. It happens so quickly. But what I can control is the way that I react to it and how I handle it. And so just being aware that I could be putting my own emotions and outside judgments on the actual event that happened, just being aware of that and being able to move past it is going to be a huge positive to me and her having an effective conversation. And something else that I need to do before I go into this conversation is decide what my goal of this conversation is. I I'm taking big risk by getting into a critical conversation with Sarah, and I really want to make sure it's worth it. I'm not just going into it to hear myself speak or to make her feel bad. I'm going into it because I want Sarah and me to be in agreement that our presentation could use a little bit more practice before we present to those C-level executives the next week. And that is what I need to keep in my mind when emotions get high. When we start cross-talking, when we start not listening to each other, I have to remind myself of what the goal of this presentation is, what the goal of this conversation is. It's really valuable to try and figure that out beforehand, because you can definitely get caught up in the heat of the moment, but you can pause and step back and realign yourself with your goal. But if you are unable to prep and you find yourself in a critical conversation, you can pause. You can take a step back. When your blood pressure gets high, you feel that sweat on your brow and your fists start to clench a little bit, and you're just like, oh, I'm going to tell you how I really feel about you. You can stop. You can just take a pause, take a mental step back, and evaluate the situation, and ask yourself that question: what do I really want out of this conversation? And you can do that. You are allowed to not talk for a few seconds and think about that to yourself. And once you kind of decide what you want out of the conversation, you can let that be your North Star and guide you to a successful conversation. So we're going to go back to that conversation with me and Sarah, and I'll let you know how it actually went with all of these new skills that I had been acquiring. Sarah, thank you so much for meeting with me. I really appreciate the time we've been able to spend together working on this initiative, and I feel like our idea could add a lot of value to the company. I'm so glad you think so. I think so too. So now I'm going to inoculate the conversation again by telling Sarah that I appreciate her and the work that she's been doing. We've both put a lot of work into this, and I think you're really great at this job. I've noticed you've been working on your public speaking skills, so I wanted to share some feedback with you that I think might help you reach your goal and help make our presentation even better. During our practice, you took over after I paused, and I didn't get to present again. I was standing there feeling disowned. I was worried it didn't make us look like equal professional partners, and I don't want that to minimize any impact our idea will have when we present to the C-levels next week. Oops, I had that on Sarah. That was me. Then Sarah responds, I'm not sure I agree. I thought the presentation went really well. It seemed like Gary was engaged and had good questions at the end. Now, I could let the story I told myself earlier take over here. It sounds like Sarah is trying to take all the glory and push me aside, and it's feeding into the self-prophesizing story that I had already told myself. But I'm aware that it's just a story, and that it was my emotions creating that story. So I'm able to stop and pause and evaluate the actual facts of the conversation, move past it, and keep focus on my goal. So I think it was a good practice run, but I think if we work on defining our roles and practice the flow, we could have something really special on our hands. Gary is really good at giving positive feedback and being very supportive, but he really didn't provide any critical feedback. You are right about that. Gary is really good at being positive, but has a hard time giving tough feedback. I'm still not sure I totally agree with you about how the practice went, but I do think we could be even better with a little bit more practice in defining our roles. Success! I know you already saw this, and you probably knew that this was going to happen, but remember the goal of that conversation that I had with Sarah was not to get her to admit that she was wrong and I was right. What I really wanted out of that conversation was for us to agree on the fact that we could use some more practice before we do our presentation. And we were able to reach that goal. So I was able not to make the fool's choice. I inoculated my message. I mastered my own story, and I stayed on a path towards my goal. I was also very lucky that Sarah was able to see on her own that some practice could be beneficial for us. I never made that explicit request, which brings us to our last item of making requests. And making requests is such an important way to close out your critical conversation. You have put so much work into understanding your feelings, building a trusting space, mastering your story, inoculating the message, all that good stuff. You've put so much work into having this critical conversation. It'd be such a waste to let it fall flat at the end. And so we need to add like a clear, clean-cut finish to the end of our conversation by making sure that our needs and our requests are known, and by expressing that pretty explicitly. And it can feel really selfish and awkward. I don't know about you, but in Minnesota, it feels like bugs on your skin asking for something that you need instead of and not asking for something for somebody else. To say this is what I need to be happy feels very out of the box of comfort. But what can happen without it? So we'll go back to that conversation with Daniel and Katie and see what can happen if you have all of the right tools, all of the right conversation, but you don't actually close it out with a request. So back to Daniel and Katie. I'll just kind of jump into the middle of it. So Katie was saying, when you start our PM meetings by saying, "Hi guys, it makes me feel excluded because I'm not a guy, I'm a woman. It would make me feel so much more included if you could use gender neutral terms in the future." Okay, sure. And this is so close. But it's not actually a request. Katie never asked for anything explicitly from Daniel. She did say that it would make her feel more included if he would use more gender neutral terms, but she never asked anything of him. Someone who's listening very carefully might be able to pick up on the fact that it would make her feel better if they changed the way that they said something. But Katie needs to end this with a reason for accountability. Without that clear request, Daniel might not feel accountable for any of these items and never actually change his ways. And that can lead to Katie feeling resentful for his lack of progress. And she might have assumed telling him his actions made her feel unincluded would be enough for him to change. But that was an unspoken expectation. And the worst part about unspoken expectations is that we're relying on people to read our minds. And I don't know about you, I have not perfected my mind reading capabilities. And so we need to be really explicit. We need to make those unspoken expectations become spoken expectations. So we'll go back into the conversation with Daniel and Katie and see what that conversation looks like when Katie makes a really clear request. When you start our PM meetings by saying, "Hi guys, it makes me feel excluded because I'm not a guy, I'm a woman. In our next meetings, could you please use more gender neutral terms like hi all, hi folks, or hi team?" Yes, I will try to do my best at that, and please feel free to correct me if you catch me saying hi guys again. Maybe I'll even start the meeting by asking everyone to keep me accountable for this change. Doesn't that bring a smile to your face? Who knew that Daniel could be such a good guy? And so now with this explicit request, Daniel feels accountable to make this change, and Katie also has a reason to follow up with him and hold him accountable. So my joy for learning about communication has really helped me achieve a lot of goals that I never thought would be achievable or would be something that would take years and years of establishing myself in my career to achieve these goals. Being able to effectively communicate with my coworkers, my managers, and clients have helped me become a go-to person in times of feast and famine. And it has been a really fun thing to incorporate into my life. So not only has it helped my career, it has definitely made me a better friend and a better partner and just a better family member as well. So before I wrap things up, I want to open the floor to any questions you might have of how to apply this in your life, any comments you might have, or if you want to share any stories. Does anybody have anything they'd like to contribute? Yeah.
So
we could get into semantics and grammar very much here, but especially in America right now, it's a very heated debate. So saying guys, a lot of people do feel excluded if they do not identify as a guy. And so I wanted to use that as like a topic that could have that very high emotional use. And if it's dismissed, it could really hurt the other person. Yeah.
I really don't want to get into this.
Yep.
So you mentioned at the beginning that maybe this, that you would never talk again with David. Was the other one?
Yeah, if it's Daniel, yeah.
So, or Daniel?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you get out of this situation when this already happened?
When yeah.
Because then you probably Daniel never will realize that Katie has now this kind of feeling about him and there's this trust which doesn't exist. And so how would you like?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So anybody that couldn't hear, he was asking about, in the very beginning, when Daniel and Katie had their first conversation and Daniel just shut Katie down. And I said, if I was Katie, I would never want to go to Daniel again with any problems that I had. And he was wondering, once this has already happened, how can you combat that? And it's definitely tough. You're still going to have to work together. You might still have a professional relationship, but Katie might be really hesitant to ever tell Daniel if she's having issues. And if you have an employee that's having issues, you kind of hope that they would be able to open up to you. And so it would either take Daniel noticing this and understanding that something is wrong with their relationship and trying to evaluate where he's at and having an open and honest conversation with Katie about what he is feeling, what he is seeing, and how they'd like to combat that. Or Katie would have to also move past her anger with Daniel and understand that that is not helping her at all to not tell him what she needs. So just having an open and honest conversation about if maybe she felt wronged or she feels like he shut her down, but being open and honest about that and be like, when you did this, it made me feel like this. When you totally shut me down for bringing a request to you, it made me feel really inadequate and like my opinion didn't matter. And I don't think that was your goal, but I just want to let you know that's how it made me feel. And once you kind of can express yourself and show vulnerability, when you can show vulnerability, people are really apt to open up and want to help. Does that kind of answer your question? Yeah. I mean, someone's going to have to make a move. Someone's going to have to notice that the conversation has been broken, the communication has been broken. Yeah.
In the beginning, you said that if you want to give feedback to someone, you have to honestly feel appreciation for that person.
Yeah.
If you cannot come to this point,
It's true. And this can't happen all the time. Like, you can't always have a nonviolent communication with somebody. It is not always going to happen. There are just some of those people that you honestly, if you don't care about them, why invest in building trust with them and having that open and honest communication and really pouring time into building that relationship? If you get nothing from them, you don't like them at all, you don't have to try to force it. You might just have to have a professional working relationship where you just depend on them for the basic needs of making your job work. And if they don't care about you at all, if you don't care about them, you can't really have this kind of conversation. It happens. Some people aren't worth your time. Yeah. Oh, sorry, what was that?
you wouldn't recommend to not give any feedback then?
It depends. Because if it is affecting your professional career, you could give professional feedback if you need to. But if the feedback that you're giving them is something that really is going to help them grow as a person and as a coworker, and you really do care about them becoming better and that you think this piece of information would help them, if you don't enjoy talking to them, if you don't enjoy having a conversation with them, you probably won't share this with them. Because it's tough to have this conversation. And it's tough to feel uncomfortable. And it's like, well, you know, I'd rather just not share that with them than even have this conversation. So that's where this is coming from. Does that help? Okay, great. Yeah.
What if a person you speak with is aware of those mechanisms? Because nonviolent communication is just one model. There's also into more manipulative approach, like for instance, and basically understands everything. Even if you see the value in the person you want to help, but the other side uses all those mechanisms to reach his goal, not necessarily the best outcome for everyone.
So what if someone is basically just all for them?
Or basically just manipulates to reach the goal.
Yeah.
And
And that's another situation of maybe someone that isn't worth your time, unfortunately. This doesn't work in all instances. This is just one skill that you can add to your tool belt to help you become just more efficient in your life. It's just another package to add to your library. It might not work in every single instance, but hopefully sometimes these skills will be able to help you become a more efficient communicator. And if the other person is basically manipulative and only trying to accomplish their goal, that's just too bad for them, because if they're going to do it all on their own and manipulate and destroy relationships, they're only going to get so far. So I think being able to effectively communicate and connect with people is something that can help you get even further than if you were manipulating and trying to do it on your own. Does that kind of answer your question? Cool. Yeah.
So the trust bank account. So I've been working with the emotional bank account concept, and that works quite well.
Yeah.
But I was a bit surprised when I see the trust bank account, because I thought trust is something that once you break it, no matter how much more investment you put back into it, you're not going to get it back.
That's a good point.
And I've been hurt like that, right? Like even though that situation is like more than 10 years ago,
Yeah.
this person is still around me today, never got back my trust.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. So what happens if you're building up that trust account and then somebody just totally breaks your trust, or you break their trust? How can you ever come back from that? Once you really break trust, can you ever refill that trust account? And I think it definitely depends on the situation, and it depends on the person. If someone breaks their trust with me, it does take a lot to build it back up, and they really have to show me. So basically building that trust is showing that other person that you have their best interests in mind, you want them to succeed. And if you're already in the negative with that trust account, like they have overdrafted several times on their trust account, it takes a lot of work to build that back up. And sometimes it doesn't. This is stuff that doesn't work in all situations. This isn't something that you can just like kind of apply it across the board and it will always be the thing to work. Sometimes trust can't be rebuilt, and that is just something that we have to deal with. But we can always try to build up trust, and we can always try to show that person that we do care about their success. Even if we have to be blatantly honest and be like, I care about your success because that's going to help me succeed. You can say something like that, you know? Be like, I want you to succeed because that's going to make our company better, and I'm part of this company, and I want this company to be better. So you might not even be able to personally care about that person, but you might be able to at least build up trust to say that you do want to see them succeed. And if they don't trust you, you can just be like, because I want to succeed, to be honest with you. So it is something where you can totally break it and it can't be fixed again, but you can, if you're aware of it, you can try. And if you can't build up trust, you can at least inoculate your message and hopefully be able to share that information with that person again without them feeling too attacked or negative. So we're getting down to the end of this. And I really appreciate your comments and your feedback and your questions. I think they are really great, and I hope I was able to answer them efficiently. But if anybody wants to continue any of these conversations, please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. If you have any more questions, I'd be super happy to have this conversation even more. So I know this is a lot, and we have talked about a lot today, but I really do believe that if you're able to grab one of these items and take it home and practice, it's really going to help you become a more efficient communicator. So here's some actionable items. We've kind of talked about like the big picture stuff, but for understanding our feelings, if you kind of dig down, allow yourself to feel those feelings, and build up your feeling vocabulary, it can really help you be able to understand and express those feelings. And then with trust, you can start with the heart, build up that trust account, and hopefully inoculate your message. Those critical conversations, you can avoid the fool's choice, master your story, and then let your goal be your North Star. And making requests, just making those requests and needs known. Increase that accountability by being explicit and really making sure that that other person understands what they need to do at the end of this conversation. And then also be sure to ask them for their explicit requests. Make sure that you have some actionable items to work on at the end of the conversation. Push past that awkwardness of making a request and saying what you need to be successful or be happy. So if you are able to grab one of these, even if you can grab one item, one actionable item from one of these, I really do believe that you're going to be well on your way to becoming more efficient at work, a better partner at home, and that friend that everyone is going to want to hang out with. Thank you very much. My name is Casie Siekman. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.